Okay, so question number 6 is the Global Positioning Systems, GPS. They're used for many different applications. Now the question is asking us to describe how GPS is used by a smartphone to pinpoint its location. So now, this question is using the concepts of GPS, so we have to know an understanding of how the GPS works. So the answers that you're going to be writing down for 4 marks is that you can write down is that the location of the smartphone can be somewhat calculated using a GPS software. So you have to mention that the GPS software, we're going to say that the GPS software can be used to calculate the location of the smartphone. All right, can be used to calculate the location of the smartphone. All right, so that's one point that you can write down, and then you can say that the satellite, or let's say the signal, is transmitted by the satellite. That's another point that you're going to write down, is that the signal is transmitted by a satellite. Then the next point you're going to write down is that the signal is sent continuously. So the signal is sent almost continuously. All right, and the data is saved in the smartphone. Data is saved in the smartphone. Okay, now this is the answer that you should be writing down for 4 marks, approximately, somewhat close to this. And some other mentions that you can include in this question is that the coordinates of the smartphone, they're shown on the smartphone screen. Okay, so these are the points that you can mention that the GPS software is used to calculate the location of the smartphone. You can say that the signal is transmitted by the satellite. The signal is all sent almost continuously, and the coordinates of the smartphone are shown on the smartphone screen. Or you can mention that the data is saved in the smartphone. Let's move on to the next question. All right, so the next question is that give 3 other examples of the use of GPS. Now, you guys can use any examples you guys like. So let's say GPS is used in a real-time, let's say, aircraft position, right? You can mention that, real-time aircraft position. You can mention that it can either be ship or drone positions. Ships use also GPS. Then you can mention that it can be used for military. Okay, that's another point that you can write down. Then you can mention that it's used for tracking delivery of stolen vehicles. You can mention some other points like that. Okay, tracking delivery / you can mention either stolen vehicles. You can mention that as well. Some other points that you can include here is that you can say plowing fields. You can use GPS in that case. You can use satellite navigation in a vehicle, for example, a car, right? You use GPS in cars to reach a destination where you just input the location where you want to go to. So these are some of the examples that you can write for 3 marks. Let's move on to the next question. Okay, so the next question is question number 7, is that it's stating that Tavara School is presenting a concert. For previous concerts, and the booking of tickets was carried out manually using pen and paper. For this concert, they're going to be using an online booking system. Discuss the advantages and disadvantages of Tavara School using an online booking system rather than a manual system. So the question is worth 8 marks. So what you're going to do is you're going to write 4 points for the advantages and 4 points for the disadvantages. All right, so you're going to split it up into advantages and disadvantages. So in total, you should be having 8 points, which should give you 8 marks. So the first point that we're going to write down is for the advantages, is that the advantages we can use is to prevent, let's say, double booking, or to prevent overbooking or double overbooking. In this case, it can be to prevent double booking or overbooking. Now, you can mention that the bookings are made 24/7. I've seen this keyword being used, can be made 24/7. 24 times 7, you can just mention 24/7. The other advantages of using an online booking system than a manual system is that it's cheaper, right? So it's usually, you can mention that it's usually cheaper as lower overheads are used, right? We can use high overheads in this case. and the booking staff can more easily see the seats that are available using an online booking system. So you can mention that point as well, is that the booking staff can more easily see the seats that are available. Okay. Now, what are some of the disadvantages here in the online booking system? Now, since it's cheaper in that case, there could be some disadvantages for using online booking systems. It just represents that the expensive cost of purchasing the hardware in this case. That could be some of the disadvantages here that you guys can write down. You can write disadvantages, or by the way, in your question paper, when you guys are answering this question, you can either split it like this, or best is just to mention that here are some of the advantages and then start writing down your points. You guys can do that as well. So you can say that requires the school to purchase expensive hardware. You can mention that, and then you can mention that setting up is more expensive. You can also mention that the maintenance, usually for these online booking systems, the maintenance is usually more expensive in this case. Maintenance of anything software related. So maintenance is more expensive. You can mention the cost here. All right. Then the next point that you can write down is that the internet has to be there when you're doing online booking system. It doesn't work without the internet. So the internet access is needed to run the booking cost. It's needed to run the booking system here in this case. So the cost may increase. Okay. Now, these are some of the advantages and disadvantages of using an online booking system. Now, some of the other additional advantages that you guys can write is that the booking staff can see immediately if the concert is fully booked. The other disadvantages are it's more reliant on hardware. So these are some additional points that you guys can write down for 8 marks fully when discussing the advantages and disadvantages of using an online booking system rather than a manual system. Let's move on to the next question. Now, the next question is to identify the most appropriate method of implementation of the new online booking system in this scenario. So some of the advantages, or not advantages here, appropriate method would be direct changeover. That would be the best choice that you guys can use here. All right, direct changeover. Now, the next question states that explain giving reasons why your answer to part B is the most appropriate method of implementation for the scenario. So now the reason why we use direct changeover is that the benefits are immediate. So meaning that you get results quickly and efficiently. So that's something that you can write down for the first point. You can mention is that the benefits, they are immediate, right? They're immediate. You can also mention that it is cheaper since one set of staff, right? One set of staff. Okay. You can also mention that there's only one system in operation, so therefore data is not duplicated. So you can mention that as well. So it's that it's only one. Let me just reload the system again. That it's only one system. It's only one system in operation, right? So therefore data is not duplicated. So these are some of the 3 points that can be written down for this question. You can also mention that there's less chance of the new system being faulty as it is thoroughly tested. That's another point that you guys can write down for 3 marks. Okay, so question number 8 specifies to describe the advantages and disadvantages of using a smartphone rather than a laptop computer to access the internet. So now here are some of the advantages that I've written down is that you all know how smartphones work and how you use them. So smartphones can access internet in more places. So like when you use smartphones, you can access internet wherever you go, depending on the location you are at. smartphones are more likely to retain the connection while they're on move. So you tend to use your smartphone, like let's say while calling and walking, the connection is still strong. So that's how you can mention one of the advantages of using a smartphone there. Then you can also mention that they can access the internet quickly, as they're more likely to have the smartphone with them. That's another example that you can write down for the advantages. Since this question is for about 6 marks, you're going to split this thing into about 3 marks for the advantages and 3 marks for the disadvantages. Now, some of the disadvantages mentioned here about the smartphone is that the websites displayed on the smartphone are not the full versions of the website. So if you notice that when you use your smartphone and when you try to look at a website, it seems to be blocked and cut off. Some of the information seems to be blocked or cut off. That's because due to the smaller screen size on the smartphone. Whereas if you use a laptop, you're more likely to see the full version of a website while you're reading it or browsing it. So that's why the next point is that browsing or reading on a website is more difficult on a smartphone is due to its smaller screen size. Okay? And the next part is that it's more difficult to type in or let's say navigate websites or emails due to the smaller on-screen keyboard. Is that when you try to type information in a smartphone in terms of websites, it's a whole different story when you're doing it on a laptop. And you can also mention other disadvantages, such as like as children can access the internet anywhere from anywhere, it just leaves them more vulnerable to exploitations on the internet. So it really depends for children in this case. So that's some of the disadvantages you can mention of using a smartphone. Let's move on to the next question. Next question is that the introduction of computers into the workplace has affected a lot of job patterns. So explain what is meant by part-time working. So part-time working just means that it's working fewer hours, let me just write that down properly. Working fewer hours a week than full-time staff. Okay, that's for 2 marks that you can write down. Then full-time staff. Explain what is meant by compressed hours working. Compressed hours working is that it just works the required hours in a week in a fewer number of days. Now these are keywords that you have to write down for about 2 marks for this question. Now the next question is that employees working in the office use computers for prolonged periods of time. Describe 3 items that an employee should be provided with to help reduce the problems related to prolonged use of computers. So this question is that it's for 3 marks. So the first thing that you can write down is that rest. Okay, you can use that. Ergonomic keyboards. Now this is a really, really important keyword that you guys remember. Ergonomic. Okay, get the spelling right. Ergonomic keywords. Not keywords, sorry. Ergonomic keyboards. Sorry guys. Ergonomic keyboards. I'm just going to say that again. Ergonomic keyboards. This is something that you guys have to remember when answering questions like this. Then you can also mention ergonomic chairs. You can also mention that. Now some other ergonomic chairs. You can also mention that. Footrest, ergonomic mouse. That seems to be the most classic as well. You can also mention that LCD or TFT, LED, anti-glare screens. You can also mention voice-activated software. You can also mention adjustable monitors. So these are some of the points that you guys can write down for 3 marks for this question. Let's move on to the next question. The office must be a safe working environment. State 2 physical safety issues that might exist from the introduction of computers. So some things to consider is that tripping over trailing cables. You can mention that injuries that's caused by equipment falling. You can mention that as well, right? Equipment falling. Some other things that you can mention for 2 marks is that fire caused by overheating computers, fire caused by overloaded sockets, electrocution caused by spilling drinks on the computer, or you can mention electrocution caused by touching live wires. Okay, that's some of the points that you guys can write down for 2 marks. Now the next question is an interesting question. It's again an advantages and disadvantages question. It's for 6 marks. You're going to be splitting it into 3 points for the advantages and 3 points for the disadvantages. So the question states that a touchscreen is both an input device and an output device. Touchscreens are used on many devices. A tablet computer uses a touchscreen. Describe the advantages and disadvantages of using a touchscreen rather than a monitor and keyboard for a tablet computer. So some of the advantages of using a touchscreen is that the footprints of the computer will be smaller, okay? And you can mention that fewer peripherals are needed, so therefore it saves money. You can also mention that it makes the computer lighter. Some other points I can include for the advantages is that it's easier to select icons, right, using a touchscreen. And then the other disadvantages that we have to mention here is that if the screen is damaged, then the device cannot be used to input data. Since this is a touchscreen, if one of it's cracked, the person cannot use the device properly to input data. Keyboards and monitors can be replaced more easily, so that makes it more, in terms of cost, it's a different story again. Then you can also mention that screens can become dirty, so more easily, therefore it just affects the reading of data. Okay, just constantly have to clean that screen to read the data. Some other disadvantages, or you can mention that in this case, is that large fingers could miskey data, so therefore there could be more errors on data entry in this case. So that's some of the other disadvantages that you guys can consider. Now, let's move on to the next question. Now, when creating an ICT solution, the legal, moral, ethical, and cultural implications have to be considered. Choose the most appropriate implication that matches the descriptions below, ensuring that copyright laws have been followed. Now, this is a legal implication, the most appropriate implication, not giving information about the ICT solution to another company. This is more of an ethical implication that should be considered here. Question 12. The manager of a car garage has asked a systems analyst to create a new database system for the checking of cars, making sure that they are safe to drive. The checking of the cars is known as a service. Each car has a unique license plate, so remember that it has a unique license plate. The cars can either be powered by electric or petrol. Remember, electric or petrol. Cars are serviced every 10,000 kilometers. For example, 10,000 kilometers, 20,000 kilometers. So that means it's just increasing. It's increasing by 10,000 kilometers. The minimum cost of the service is 1,500 rupees, and the maximum is 5,000 rupees, depending on the model of the car. Different models of the car are serviced. The date of the service is agreed. Complete the table filling in the field names and the most appropriate data types to create the database using the information given above. For any numeric field, specify the type of the number. Okay, so vehicle license plate. Now, this data type really depends. There's sometimes letters and alphabets. There's sometimes alphabets and numbers there. So you can mention that this is more of a text data type or alphanumeric data type. Now, powered by. What type of data type is this? So it's powered by either electric or petrol. So it's giving you two options to choose from. So this is more of a Boolean data type. Numeric integer. So this numeric integer is the car service, right? The cars are serviced every 10,000 kilometers. So we can mention that this could be the service interval, okay? Cost of service. Now, the cost of the service is 1,500 rupees. So since they have mentioned rupees, this is going to become numeric. Since it's a numerical value, it's going to become a numeric. However, it's going to be written as currency. Okay, since it's rupees mentioned there. So it's numeric currency. Okay, now text. Different models of cars are serviced, so we can mention the word model there in the field name. So that's text. Date of service is agreed. Now, date of service is agreed. That is data type of date. So this is for a total of 6 marks that you guys can mention here. Now let's move on to the next question. Now the next question is that a systems analyst is planning to create a relational database. Discuss the advantages and disadvantages of creating a relational database rather than a flat file database. Since the questions for 6 marks are going to split again for 3 marks for the advantages and 3 marks for the disadvantages. The advantages here is that it uses the data flexibility, it uses data integrity, it uses data consistency. And the other advantages that we can mention here is that the service details, they only need to be entered once into the database in terms of the relational database, and the mistakes are less likely to happen when we enter data if it already exists in a relational database, right? Then it uses, let's say, data redundancy. Okay, yeah, that's the correct term. It uses data redundancy in this case. You mentioned that data can be accessed using any key fields. So there's some of the other points that we can consider, such as let's say better security due to the user level access control, and it caters for future requirements. So these are some of the advantages that we can write down of creating a relational database rather than a flat file database. Now, what's the disadvantages? Disadvantages here is that it requires training to set up, and it's harder to set up, in fact, and also requires a data administrator, so it therefore increases costs, causing the relational database to be more complex. So the part where I said it requires a data administrator and therefore increases the cost, that could be another point that can add up in terms of the disadvantages. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Now, the next question is that for each of the fields shown, name and describe one validation check that can be used on the data. Your answers must be different in each case. Now, since this is a vehicle license plate, you have to use a presence check. Okay, you can use either two different types of techniques. You can either use a presence check or a format check. So here we're just going to be moving on with presence check. Okay. Presence check, what is that? Presence check, the description here, it is to say that it's to make sure that it has been entered, or let's say it has been entered as its unique number, okay, in this case, as it's unique. If you're supposed to go with validation check like format check, you just need to describe it as to fit in with the layout, okay, for 2 marks. Cost of service. Now, the validation check here could be the type check. We can mention that to type check. And the description could be only digits only, okay, since this is the cost of service. Another point that you can consider is that range check. You can check between 1,500 and 5,000, okay. And date of service. Now, date of service is more of a format check that you're going to be using. These are some of the validation techniques that you should be knowing. You can mention that to ensure that it is DDMMM/YYYY. Now, this is the format for one of the dates that you can mention, date of service. There are different types of formats. This would be the preferred option in this case, DDMMM/YYYY. The other points you can mention for date of service validation checks are range check. It's to ensure it is between certain dates. Or you can mention length check, maximum of, for example, 11 characters. Now, this could really depend. It could be either 8 or 6 in this case. So this is something that you can mention for about 2 marks. Next question. A family has a number of different devices connected to the internet. Identify 3 items of computer hardware that may need to be purchased in order to set up a computer network so that the devices can use the internet. So you must have seen at your homes, you either have a router. Okay, first of all, we need to have network cards, right? That's the most important thing when you're setting up a computer network. You need to have network cards. Then you need to have a router and a switch. Okay, you can either have a switch or you can mention a hub. Okay, it really depends in this case for 3 marks. So you can either write a switch or a hub. Now, B. Arjun is a member of the family. He uses the internet to carry out research and send work to his office. Describe 3 other ways he can make appropriate use of the internet. So since he's carrying out research and he's sending work to his office, some of the ways that he can be using the internet in an appropriate way could be email. You can mention that for 1 mark. Email, he could be using a voice over internet protocol, or he can be using online chat. It could also work, online chat. He can be using it for gaming in this case, okay. Some of the other points I can write down here is that actually, since it's mentioned appropriate, we're just going to remove that gaming part. and we're just going to be using, let's say, online conference. That would be the most appropriate. Instead of gaming, this is going to be writing online conference. So that seems to be the appropriate use of the internet. But some of the other points that you can mention here is that you can use instant messaging, VoIP, that means it's voice over internet protocol. You can mention streaming music, video, TV on demand. You can mention gaming, but since this is appropriate use of the internet, best is to write these appropriate points. Use of the cloud, news groups, and FTP. You can either mention some of these points for 3 marks. Let's move on to the next question. Arjun uses the internet to carry out research for his work. Describe 2 drawbacks of Arjun using the internet for research. Now, since he's using the internet, the information, it can be unreliable. Okay, since he's using the internet, it really depends whether the information is correct. Okay, so he has to just cross-validate that, and the data may be out of date. That's something to be considered when you're using online resources. Sometimes the data is accurate, sometimes you just need to check it again. So 2 points, 2 marks. Information can be unreliable, data may be out of date. Some other points you can mention is that it's unregulated, so anyone can post anything on the internet. It's more difficult to find out what you're looking for when you're using the internet as well. There's a vast amount of information, and information overloads could be some of the points. You can write down that the information may be biased or inaccurate, or it can be slower to find relevant information since you're moving through a vast amount of information in the internet. Okay, so those are some of the points you can consider. Let's move on to the next question. Next question is that Arjun can log directly into his office system from his home computer. The office system only requires users to enter their user ID and a password. Explain why this is not very secure. This is because user ID and passwords, right? User ID and passwords can sometimes be easily guessed, okay, depending on the person, on how they put their user ID and password. Can sometimes be easily guessed. You can also mention that others, right? Others can see the details being typed in when you type your user ID and password. Others can see the details being typed in. Some other points you can mention is that passwords can be hacked with a key logging software. You can also mention passwords can be hacked by using random password generators. You can also mention that if the home computer saves the login information, then anyone can access that if they open up the home computer, since it saved up the login information. If the user does not log out, the others can access that data. Oh yeah, by the way, whenever you're using information on on another laptop, try to log out. Okay, that would be the best option if it's not your own based computer. If it's your own computer, it should be all right as long as the computer is with you. You can just try to keep it safe. That's it. The other points, the next question states that describe 2 other ways the office system could identify the user securely. Now, one way could be using a one-use code or a token. You can mention that you can use a one-use code or a token. So since it's 4 marks, it's 2 points for each one. You can mention that Arjun enters a code into the system. You can mention that Arjun, he enters a code, a specific code, enters a code into the system. All right. He can also mention that Arjun logs. You can also mention that Arjun logs in, then software generates a one-use code. This could either be a code or a token. It really depends what your choice is. You can also mention that even if the hacker intercepts, right, the code, it's no use as it can only be used once. So the token, or let's say if you're using a token, the token time is limited. The other way could be biometrics. That seems to be the most best way to do this, is that biometrics, right? When you're using biometrics, let me just reload the system again. Using biometrics, right? Using biometric scanner to capture digital images, digital image of fingerprint, right? A fingerprint, that could be one example. Retina, iris, or face. So each biometric is unique, right? So if you're using biometrics concept, you can also mention that each biometric is unique. Okay, each biometric is unique. You can mention that. You can also mention that biometrics are nearly impossible to forge. Okay. For the other part, if you're saying about the one-use code, you can say that even if hacker intercepts, you can mention this point actually, even if hacker intercepts code, is no use, as can only be used once, right? As can only be used once. So we're just adding some additional points for 4 marks just to solidify what we're trying to mention about the one-use code and the biometrics. The other way could be using a card or a dongle. Now, if a user has a card or dongle which is inserted into the computer, the dongle or the card is read by that computer. So you can mention that the dongle / the card data is unique. That could be some other additional 2 points I can be writing down for 4 marks. Okay, so these are the answers I can write down for a total of 4 marks. This seems to be the end of all the questions. If you guys have enjoyed the video, please do like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It really helps a lot. And yeah, do comment below on what your thoughts are about this video. And yeah, new videos and new content will be posted soon. And I think that's it. All right. Bye, guys.